On nights when Bearcliff seemed frozen in time, when the town lay under a heavy quilt of snow and silence, Ethan Miller often wondered if the mountains themselves were guarding secrets. He was used to long patrols where nothing stirred but the wind and his own thoughts. Yet something in the air that night felt different. It was as though the streets were waiting, holding their breath for what he was about to find. Ethan had no idea that before his shift ended, he would come face to face with a broken creature whose story would bind itself to his own in ways he could never imagine. Ethan Miller, 35 years old, was no stranger to harsh nights. The former Army MP had spent years in deserts overseas before coming home and wearing the badge in Colorado. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with storm-gray eyes that carried the weight of things seen but never forgotten. His short chestnut hair, brushed with silver at the temples, made him look older than his age. People in town called him serious, reserved. He lived alone in a small cabin at the edge of Bearcliff, where the silence of the pines suited him better than crowded dinners or noisy bars. But for all his quiet ways, Ethan never turned from someone in need. That was what made him keep patrolling long after most would call it a night. The streets of Bearcliff were nearly deserted. Snow fell steady, catching the orange glow of street lamps. The cold carried the bite of pine smoke, drifting from chimneys of houses where families huddled safe and warm. Ethan's cruiser rolled slowly along, tires crunching on ice, heater humming against the bitter air. His eyes scanned the sidewalks out of habit, alert and searching. Most nights, it was only stray cats or the flicker of a fox in the shadows. But not tonight. As he turned a corner near an abandoned lot, the silence broke. It wasn't the gentle laughter of neighbors sharing cocoa inside. No, it was sharper, colder, laughter edged with cruelty. Ethan slowed, dimming his headlights. Ahead, beneath the weak glow of a flickering bus stop lamp, stood 3 teenage boys. They were huddled in a half-circle, their voices raised, faces flushed from cold and mischief. And in the center of their circle, cowering low to the frozen ground, was a dog. Ethan's stomach twisted. The animal was no stray pup. It was a German shepherd, but old, its ribs showing through a thin, matted coat. Snow clung to its back, dulling what had once been proud black and tan fur. Its tail was clamped tight between spindly legs, paws trembling against the icy concrete. The dog's cloudy amber eyes darted frantically, but it had nowhere to run. One of the boys, tall and lanky with a red hoodie pulled tight around his face, stooped and scooped up a chunk of ice. He hurled it at the dog. The shepherd yelped, curling tighter against the bench. "Look at this thing!" The boy sneered, breath fogging in the night air. "Bet it hasn't eaten in weeks." "Hey, Mutt, catch!" he mimed, throwing again, making the others howl with laughter. The second boy, shorter, with a baseball cap shoved low, shoved his hands into his pockets, but still grinned at the cruelty. The third, heavy-set with red cheeks raw from the cold, bent to scoop snow. Their voices rose, reckless with the energy of kids too young to understand the harm they dealt. Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. He knew that sound, that mocking laughter. He had heard it overseas, in places where power was tested on the weak. Without hesitation, he pulled the cruiser to the curb and stepped out. The snow muffled his boots as he strode forward, shoulders squared. "Hey!" His voice cracked sharp through the night. The boys froze. The one in the red hoodie turned, bravado faltering at the sight of the uniform. Ethan's gray eyes locked on them, cold as the storm. "Step back," he ordered. "It's just a dog," the boy muttered, though his voice had lost its edge. "Step back." Ethan's tone dropped lower, steady and unyielding, the kind of command honed from years of leading soldiers. The heavy-set boy tugged nervously on his friend's sleeve. "Come on, man." But Ethan took one step closer, his presence pressing heavy as thunder. "I said move!" The 3 scattered. Their sneakers slapped against ice as they disappeared into the dark, their laughter trailing behind them, thinner now, embarrassed. When their footsteps faded, Ethan crouched near the bench. The shepherd pressed itself against the wooden slats, sides heaving. Its amber eyes met his for a fleeting second, then slid away. Its body trembled with fear and cold. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, voice softening. He looked closer. This wasn't a young stray. The dog was older, its muzzle graying, its once proud ears drooping. A faint scar crossed its neck where fur had thinned. Its nails were cracked, paws raw, as if it had wandered for months without care. A veteran of battles no one had witnessed. Ethan extended a gloved hand, palm open in peace. "You're safe now." The shepherd's nostrils flared. It shivered, torn between instinct and exhaustion. Slowly it lowered its head. Ethan slipped off one glove and reached out again, letting the cold bite into his skin. His hand brushed brittle fur. The dog stiffened, then released a shuddering sigh, surrendering to the touch. "That's it," Ethan whispered. Gentler still. "You're all right." The snow thickened. Wind cut sharper. The temperature was dropping fast, and Ethan knew if he left the dog here it wouldn't survive the night. Carefully he gathered the frail body into his arms. Shock gripped him at how light it was. German shepherds were supposed to be strong, muscular, but this one felt like bones wrapped in thin cloth. Still, it didn't resist. It simply rested its head against his chest, too tired to fight. Ethan carried it to his cruiser and laid it across the back seat, draping an emergency blanket over its shivering form. The dog curled weakly, eyes half closing. Ethan lingered there for a moment, watching its fragile breaths, his own chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. Then he slid behind the wheel and pulled away. The radio crackled to life. "Unit 12, come in," the dispatcher's voice called. "This is Unit 12, Ethan answered, steady, though his eyes flicked constantly to the rear-view mirror. "We've had another report of a break-in near the warehouse district. Same crew as before. Locks broken, goods stolen, no witnesses. Can you check after patrol?" Ethan frowned. Those thefts had been happening all month, always vanishing into snow before anyone arrived. "Copy that," he replied. In the mirror, the shepherd stirred. Its tired gaze lifted, catching Ethan's eyes for the briefest moment. Something sparked there, thin, fragile, but alive. A thread of connection. Unexpected but undeniable. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't know it yet, but this old dog would not only survive, it would walk beside him into dangers neither of them could foresee. Out there, in the abandoned warehouses cloaked by snowdrifts, the path of man and dog was already set, leading toward shadows that would test them both. The storm still pressed hard when Ethan steered his cruiser through the quiet streets of Bearcliff. The heater rattled against the cold, blowing weak warmth toward the fragile form curled in the back seat. The shepherd's breathing was shallow but steady. Ethan kept glancing at the mirror, uneasy with the thought that the animal might not see the morning. Past shuttered shops and sleeping houses, the faint glow of neon came into view, the sign of Bearcliff Veterinary Clinic. The small building sat at the corner of Maple and Fifth, its windows glowing with amber light against the snow. Ethan pulled into the lot, cut the engine, and stepped out. His boots crunched as he opened the rear door and lifted the dog once more into his arms. It stirred faintly, giving a soft whine that tugged at him deeper than he expected. Inside, the clinic was warm, the air carrying the sharp smell of antiseptic mixed with cedar shavings. From the reception desk, a woman stepped forward, auburn hair tied in a loose bun, hazel eyes steady behind rectangular glasses. Her name tag read, Dr. Sarah Whitmore. Sarah had been Bearcliff's veterinarian for more than a decade, known for her gentle patience and her quiet strength. A strength born from her own losses, though few spoke of them. Years earlier, she had left a marriage that had drained her spirit, choosing to rebuild her life in this mountain town, where creatures at least met her kindness with honesty. Tall and slim, with lines of fatigue beneath her eyes, she carried herself with calm authority, though her voice was always gentle when addressing the hurt and the helpless. "Officer Miller," she greeted with a faint smile. "You're out late." Her gaze shifted to the bundle in his arms, and her expression softened with alarm. "Oh, you poor thing. Let's get him to an exam room." Ethan followed as Sarah led him down the hall. He laid the dog carefully on a padded table under bright fluorescent light. The shepherd blinked, flinched slightly, but didn't resist as Sarah approached with practiced hands. She murmured reassurances, her voice low and steady as she checked its gums, eyes, and paws. "He's old," she said, her tone clinical, yet touched with sympathy. At least 9, maybe 10, severely underweight, dehydrated, ribs and hips too pronounced, teeth worn down, and this limp. She bent, running her hands gently along the dog's right hind leg. Old injury, probably never healed properly. He's been fending for himself for a long time. Ethan stood silently, arms crossed, his gray eyes fixed on the shepherd. He noticed the way the dog's ears twitched at Sarah's touch, but never snapped or growled. There was trust somewhere beneath the fear, a flicker of discipline, long ingrained. Sarah paused, fingers brushing the thick fur of the dog's neck. She parted the matted hair and her brow furrowed. "Here, do you see this?" Ethan stepped closer. Beneath the coat was a faint ring of scar tissue just below the throat, a circle worn deep into the skin over time. "That's not from a fight," Sarah murmured. "That's from equipment, a training collar. A canine issue one specifically." She straightened, adjusting her glasses. "This dog was trained once, worked with handlers. He wasn't always a stray." Ethan's chest tightened. He looked down at the shepherd with new eyes. The animal shifted, raising its weary head as though it knew the truth had been uncovered. For a moment its amber gaze met Ethan's. Despite the haze of age and pain, the eyes glimmered with intelligence, with a memory of discipline and loyalty that time and abandonment had not erased. "He's been through hell," Sarah said softly. "Buta hasn't given up. Look at him, still watching, still waiting." Ethan reached out, his palm brushing over the dog's head. "You're a fighter," he whispered. The shepherd's ears twitched, and for the first time its tail gave the faintest thump against the table. Sarah smiled faintly. "He needs rest, food, fluids, warmth. I'll keep him tonight." But she hesitated, glancing at Ethan. "Strays like him, especially old ones, they don't always get claimed. If he makes it, he'll need someone." Ethan didn't answer right away. His life was built on solitude and order. A dog, an old broken one at that, was not part of the plan. Yet as he looked at the shepherd, he felt the weight of the animal's quiet resilience settle inside him. "Give him a chance," Ethan said finally. "I'll cover the costs." Sarah nodded, writing notes on a clipboard. "He deserves one." As Ethan turned to leave, he paused, his gaze on the dog once more. "Ranger?" he said softly, testing the name. The shepherd's ear perked slightly at the sound, as though acknowledging the christening. Ethan exhaled, a strange warmth flickering in his chest. "Ranger, it is." The next morning, Bearcliff woke to pale sunlight reflecting off drifts of snow. Ethan returned to the clinic after his night patrol. Sarah greeted him with a tired but satisfied expression. "He's stable. Ate a little, drank water, even stood for a few minutes. He's not out of the woods, but he wants to fight." Ethan found himself relieved, more than Heckard to admit. He stepped into the exam room where Ranger lay on a blanket. The shepherd's head lifted when Ethan entered, and though his body trembled with weakness, his tail tapped softly against the floor. Ethan crouched, letting the dog sniff his hand. "Morning, partner," he murmured. A soft giggle startled him. Ethan turned to see a small figure peeking through the door frame. The girl was no more than 10 with chestnut curls framing a pale, freckled face. She wore a too-big sweater, the sleeves dangling past her wrists, and a pair of worn snow boots. Her eyes, wide and curious, colored a gentle hazel locked on the dog with wonder. "Sorry," Sarah said from behind her. "This is Lily Thompson, my neighbor's daughter. She helps out sometimes after school." Lily stepped forward shilly, her hands clasped behind her back. She was small for her age, with a slight hunch, as though trying to disappear into herself. Sarah had once told Ethan that Lily was often teased at school, called names for her quiet nature and second-hand clothes. Her mother worked double shifts at the diner, leaving Lily to wander between neighbors. "Can I pet him?" Lily asked in a whisper. Ethan hesitated, but Ranger answered first. The shepherd, who had barely stirred for anyone, lifted his head higher, ears twitching. His tail gave another faint wag, steadier this time. Lily's face brightened, her smile timid but real. Ethan nodded. "Slowly, let him sniff your hand first." Lily crouched, extending a small hand. Ranger leaned forward, nose brushing her fingers. Then, astonishingly, he gave Agent a lick. Lily gasped, her eyes shining. "He likes me!" Ethan watched, surprise mingling with something softer. He had seen hardened veterans flinch at strangers. But here was this broken old shepherd responding to a child's tentative kindness. Sarah folded her arms, smiling faintly. "Looks like he's already chosen his people." Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, stroking Rare's fur with reverence. "What's his name?" "Ranger," Ethan said. "That's perfect," Lily whispered. "Like a hero." Ethan glanced at the girl, then at the dog. Perhaps it was coincidence. Perhaps it was something more. But in that moment, in the quiet of the clinic, with the sunlight streaming through frosted windows, a fragile bond formed. A weary officer, a broken dog, and a lonely child. Drawn together by chance and by something deeper, neither could name. The snow outside had started to soften, melting slowly into slush along the sidewalks and gravel driveways of Bear Cliff. The town was quiet, perched between winter's breath and spring's uncertain promise. The mountains still wore a shawl of white, but down in the valley, hints of thaw whispered change. Ethan Miller's house sat near the edge of town, a modest two-bedroom log cabin with a wide front porch and wood smoke curling from the chimney. It was quiet, almost too quiet until now. He opened the door, arms braced as he carried Ranger inside for the first time. The German shepherd was heavier than he looked. Skinny, yes, but still dense with years of muscle under fur matted by hardship. Ethan set him gently on the thick old rug by the fireplace. The dog didn't move at first. He curled tightly into himself, breathing shallow, as though unsure if this place was real, or just another illusion. The house had once belonged to Ethan's grandfather, a former ranger himself, long past. The living room bore the marks of its past antlers mounted above the stone hearth, framed black and white photos of the Rockies from decades ago, and shelves of old worn books Ethan rarely opened. It had always been a place of solitude, refuge after his time in the military and the brutal patrols that followed. But tonight, with Ranger lying there in the glow of the fire, something inside the walls felt less hollow. For the first few days, Ranger barely moved. He ate little, only when coaxed with broth or chicken. Ethan boiled on the stove. He drank water, slept often, and shivered despite the warmth of the room. He rarely barked, never growled. Instead, he watched Ethan with cautious, unreadable eyes. But there were signs, flickers of something deeper. On the third evening, Ethan returned from patrol just after sunset. His boots tracked snow across the floor as he stepped inside, tired and chilled. Before he could even set his keys down, a soft thump made him pause. Ranger had risen shakily. His legs trembled. His back was hunched, but he stood slowly. Painfully, the dog took 3 steps forward. He didn't wag his tail or bark. He simply approached Ethan and sat down at his feet, looking up with quiet recognition. It wasn't much, but it was everything. From then on, things changed in small increments. Ethan began waking early to walk Ranger. At first, they barely made it to the fence post beyond the porch. But each morning, the old shepherd walked a little farther, his gait uneven, but his spirit unbroken. Ethan talked to him during those walks, quiet murmurs about the job, the town, the things he never said to people. Ranger listened always. At home, Ethan set up a corner just for him, a thick folded blanket, a water bowl, and a large bone he'd bought from the local butcher. The dog slept there, but often wandered toward the window, nose pressed to the cold glass, watching the trees sway in the wind like some memory lingered just outside. One Saturday afternoon, the stillness was broken by a knock. When Ethan opened the door, Lily Thompson stood there bundled in a red wool coat 2 sizes too large, a knitted hat nearly slipping over her eyes, and a paper napkin folded in her mittened hands. "I brought something for Ranger," she said shilly, holding out a muffin torn into pieces. "It's banana. No nuts." Ethan hesitated, then stepped aside. "He's resting, but you can say hi." Lily tiptoed into the living room, her boots barely making a sound on the wooden floor. She crouched near Ranger, who lifted his head with mild curiosity. "Hi, boy," she whispered, offering a crumb. Ranger sniffed, then gently took it with his teeth, his ears twitching. Ethan watched, arms folded, leaning against the door frame. Lily seemed a tease around the dog, more than he'd ever seen her around adults. She brushed his fur slowly, then spoke without looking up. "Mom says I shouldn't wander too much," she murmured. "But it gets lonely. She works at the diner all day. I come here 'cause it's quieter than the apartments." Ethan nodded slowly. "You're welcome as long as you tell her where you are." She smiled quick and small. "I will." From that day on, Lily came by more often. Sometimes she brought scraps from the diner, sometimes just herself and a sketchbook. She would sit on the floor beside Ranger and draw quiet pictures of dogs, trees, the mountains, and once Ethan's cruiser with stars above it. They didn't talk much, but the silences were comfortable. Ranger began to expect her visits. When he heard her knock, his ears would perk, and he'd rise more easily than for anyone else. One afternoon, Sarah dropped by to check on Ranger. She smiled at the sight of the old dog lying on the rug, head resting on Lily's lap as the girl whispered Tohim. "He's healing faster than I expected," Sarah said, sitting with a cup of tea Ethan handed her. "But it's not just the food and medicine. Dogs are emotional creatures. They heal with connection." Ethan glanced at Lily and Ranger again. "Maybe we all do." Later that evening, as the wind picked up outside and the fire cracked in the hearth, Ethan looked at the scene before him. An old dog resting peacefully, a quiet girl humming softly as she traced something in her notebook, and himself, no longer alone in the silence. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, the house felt less like a place of solitude and more like a beginning. The air that evening was crisp and still, the kind of quiet that settled over Bear Cliff once the sun dipped below the pioneer-crested ridge lines. Ethan Miller zipped his Navy patrol jacket higher as he stepped out of the cruiser, the familiar jingle of Raris's collar following behind him. The German Shepherd, now noticeably stronger than weeks prior, moved with purpose, though a slight limp still marked each step. The streets were dusted with the remnants of a late snow, thin layers crunching under Ethan's boots. It was his usual patrol route, looping around the east side of town, past the abandoned rail station, and down toward the row of old storage warehouses near the lumber mill. Most of them had been empty for years, their cracked windows and rusted doors standing as relics of a time when Bear Cliff had boomed with industry. Tonight, though, something felt off. Ranger walked slightly ahead, his breath forming faint clouds in the cold. They passed the narrow alley between two warehouse buildings, the wind whistling low through a broken gutter. Then a sudden shift. Ranger stopped dead. His ears shot up, muscles tensed. He let out a low, warning growl, the sound deep and rumbling, vibrating through the leash in Ethan's hand. Ethan paused. "What is it, boy?" The shepherd pulled forward, heading toward the warehouse with the boarded overside window and the half-collapsed sign that once read, "Mason Storage Company." He sniffed the air, then yanked hard, nearly dragging Ethan across the icy gravel. When they reached the side door, Ranger barked. Sharp, urgent. Not the lazy bark of a bored dog, but the kind Ethan had only heard once before during a high-alert search drill with active K9s. Ranger pressed his snout to the crack between the door and the frame, sniffed, then moved along the edge. He circled back and pawed at something half buried in the slush near the door, a torn scrap of black fabric. Ethan crouched and picked it up. It was thick, like part of a glove, oil-stained, slightly damp and cold. That's when he noticed the door. The padlock had been snapped, not just rusted off with time, but clearly forced. The scratch marks on the metal were fresh, some still faintly gleaming in the moonlight. Ethan's training kicked in. He stepped back, placed the glove into an evidence bag from his kit, and scanned the ground with his flashlight. Muddy footprints, size 10 or 11 by the look, trailed from the door toward the alley and disappeared near the dumpster behind a neighboring unit. "Someone's been using this place," Ethan muttered. Ranger sat at the door, tail still gaze-focused. Ethan considered going in, but chose caution. If this was a drop point or a meeting spot, the last thing he wanted was to walk into something alone. He radioed the station, reported a possible break-in at the warehouse, and requested a follow-up forensics team in the morning. He looked at Ranger and gave a small nod. "Good job, partner." The dog blinked slowly, then leaned into Ethan's leg. Back home, Ethan sat at his desk, spreading the evidence bag, his patrol notes, and a satellite map of the warehouse area in front of him. A steaming mug of black coffee sat to his left, untouched. It was the first real lead in the string of petty thefts and break-ins that had been plaguing Bearcliff for the past 2 months. Tools missing from garages, car parts stripped in the night, and more recently, a local mechanic's entire backroom ransacked. No suspects, no witnesses until tonight. The glove, the footprints, the broken lock, and Ranger. Ethan glanced over at the dog, now curled on the rug, still awake, one twitching with every creak from the old house. There was something about the way Ranger had responded. Alert, confident, almost like he'd done this before. A memory stirred, the faint scar around the dog's neck, the K9 training. Somewhere in that battered body was a history written in discipline and danger. The next day, after his shift ended, Ethan stopped by Sarah's clinic to drop off a sample of the glove for analysis. She was just finishing up with a client, a wiry tabby cat named Sprinkles belonging to Mrs. Fontaine, the 70-year-old widow who owned the antique store. Sarah, tall, mid-40s with sharp cheekbones and warm eyes that rarely betrayed the exhaustion she carried, waved Ethan in with a smile. "Don't tell me Ranger's sick again," she joked, peeling off her gloves. "Not today. I actually need a favor." "Lab analysis," Ethan replied, handing her the sealed bag. "We found this at the old warehouse on Hemlock. Broken lock, fresh prints." "You think we finally got something?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You think the burglaries are tied to that place?" "More than think." Ranger found it, tracked the scent straight to the door. She gave a soft laugh. "That dog, he's something else." "Yeah." Ethan nodded, his expression softening. "He really is." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in bruised purples and fading gold, Ethan parked the cruiser by the same warehouse. This time he wasn't alone. Ranger walked beside him, untethered, but close, moving with alert grace. Ethan had cleared it with the department. Ranger was now officially registered as a retired K9 under community service protocol, with limited permission to assist during off hours. The door hadn't been touched since last night. The lock still hung broken. Inside, Ethan swept his flashlight slowly across the dusty floorboards and cracked pallets. Spiderwebs danced in the beam, and the air smelled of old wood and cold oil. Nothing seemed disturbed, but that only meant someone had cleaned up after themselves. There were no tools or stolen goods, no obvious stash. But Ranger circled again. This time he stopped near the back wall where a stack of crates leaned awkwardly beside a rusted tool chest. He sniffed once, then pawed at the base of the chest. Ethan pulled it open. Inside, an old bolt cutter half covered in dried mud and a blue bandana that looked recently used. Another clue and more questions. 2 days after Ranger uncovered the bolt cutter behind the old warehouse wall, Ethan Miller sat in his modest kitchen, the morning light casting a soft gold over the worn wooden table. A steaming mug of coffee sat untouched as he stared at a printed document in front of him. A K9 incident report dated 5 years ago from the city of Aurora, nearly 200 miles east of Bearcliff. It had taken a few phone calls and a favor from Sergeant Mike Keaton, an old academy buddy of Ethan's who now worked in records at the state police database. Ethan had described the scar on Ranger's neck, the faded indentation where a training collar had once been, and submitted a photo. Within hours, a record popped up. K9 Unit Number 8724, codename Ranger. Ethan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, trying to absorb the report. Ranger had once been a narcotics detection dog. His handler, Officer Brent Holloway, had been killed during an undercover bust of a major methamphetamine ring in Denver's outskirts. According to the file, Ranger went missing in the chaos of the raid. Shots were fired, and in the scramble the K9 had slipped through the perimeter. Nobody was found. The department assumed the worst, marking him as presumed lost. Ethan looked across the room. Ranger was lying by the window, his head resting on his front paws. At some point he had gone from a ghost in the snow to a trusted presence in Ethan's life. Now, knowing he had once belonged to another officer, one who died in the line of duty, Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He rose slowly, walked over, and crouched beside the shepherd. "So you were a hero long before I found you," he murmured gently, placing a hand on Ranger's back. The dog stirred slightly, then licked Ethan's hand with slow deliberation. That same afternoon, Ethan brought the printed report to the precinct. Chief Marion, a tall retired Marine in his late 50s with a salt-and-pepper beard and no-nonsense manner, scanned it with narrowed eyes. "Brent, haul away," the chief muttered. "I remember that raid. Messy situation. We got wind of it because one of the suspects had ties out here years ago." He looked up. "So this dog's been wandering since then?" Ethan nodded. "I don't know how he ended up here, but it explains a lot. The training, the instincts, the way he behaves around the uniform." The chief tapped the report. "You want to file foreign statement as a community K-9. Given what he found at the warehouse, that might not be a bad idea." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked out the precinct window where Ranger sat, waiting patiently in the back seat of his cruiser. "Let's see where this leads first," he said. "But yeah, he deserves to wear that badge again." Later that evening, Lily stopped by. The girl had grown more comfortable visiting Ethan's house, usually after school. Her thick winter coat was always half-zipped, her hair perpetually wine-tangled. She brought coloring books, scraps of ribbon for Rare's collar, and once a half-eaten apple she insisted was lucky. Today she held something flat wrapped in brown paper. "I made this," she said, shuffling her boots at the doorway. Ethan raised an eyebrow for Ranger. She nodded. "And you?" Inside, she peeled back the wrapping to reveal a painting, watercolor on cardboard, splashed with blues, greens, and warm golds. In the center was a house painted like Ethan's, but cheer with a big tree, a swing, and two figures, a man and a dog standing side by side. Above them in Lily's careful block letters were the words, "Your new home." Ethan blinked, unsure what to say. Lily grinned nervously. "I know it's not like museum good, but I thought maybe he'd like to know he belongs somewhere now." Ranger, as if sensing the moment, stood from his rug and patted over. He sniffed the painting, then sat down with deliberate posture, head held high as if posing beside his new insignia. His tail gave one quiet thump against the floor. Ethan smiled. "It's perfect." They hung the painting in the hallway above Rare's food bowl. That night, as Ethan passed by, he noticed something subtle. Ranger stood taller, moved with a quiet confidence, not like a stray anymore, like a soldier who had finally come home. The snow had returned to Bear Cliff, falling in fine whispering flakes that shimmered beneath the weak glow of the street lamps. The town looked peaceful, tucked into sleep like a child beneath blankets of white. But Ethan Miller wasn't resting. He sat in his patrol car, engine off, parked along the outer fence of the old warehouse district. Beside him, Ranger sat alert in the passenger seat, his ears perked forward, eyes sharp and unblinking. The German shepherd's breath fogged the glass, his body tensed like a drawn bow. Earlier that day, the town had woken up to another string of small thefts. Stolen generators, gas canisters, a missing snowmobile. The warehouse, once a grain depot from the railroad era, had long been abandoned, but it now pulsed with whispers of shadows moving where they shouldn't. Ethan checked his watch. 2:43 a.m. A cold wind howled across the lot, stirring loose tarps and banging a rusted sheet of corrugated metal against the side of the building. He whispered, "We wait a bit longer, partner." The word felt natural now. Partner, not a pet, not a stray, a partner. Minutes passed, then movement. From the far side of the lot, a dented black pickup truck rolled in slowly, its headlights off. 3 figures emerged, dressed in heavy coats and ski masks. One held a crowbar, another a duffel bag, and the third, taller, stockier, carried a large hunting knife loosely in his right hand. Ethan reached for his radio but hesitated. The warehouse sat just out of full signal range. Dispatch would take too long. He looked at Ranger. The dog was trembling, not from fear but anticipation. His muscles twitched like he was already moving. Ethan unhooked the latch from Rare's vest, but whispered, "Wait." We moved together. But as the men broke into the side door of the warehouse, one of them smashing a security light with the butt of his crowbar, a sharp clatter echoed in the night, and Ranger was gone. He leapt from the car, a dark streak against the snow, barking with terrifying force. His growl ripped through the quiet like thunder. The man with the knife barely turned in time. Ranger slammed into him full speed, knocking him backward. The blade flew from his grip, skidding across the icy ground. The other two froze. Ethan bolted from the car, weapon drawn. "Police down now!" The one with the duffel tried to run. Ethan fired a warning shot into the air. The man hit the ground hard, arms out. The third raised his crowbar, but then dropped it at the sight of Ranger, who stood over the first man, teeth bared, snarling low. Ranger had taken a scratch along his foreleg cut that bled steadily into the snow. Ethan holstered his gun and cuffed the two upright men quickly, tying their hands with zip ties from his belt. Then he knelt beside Ranger. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, running his fingers through the thick fur. "You held your ground. That was brave." Ranger looked up, ears flicking back, and then pressed his head against Ethan's chest with a soft whine. "You're bleeding," Ethan whispered, voice thick. "Let's get you out of here, partner." By the time they returned to the cruiser, backup had finally arrived. Deputy Carla Monroe, a stout, non-nonsense woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and short curly hair, met Ethan by the side of the car. "3 suspects in total?" she asked, glancing toward the cuffed men being loaded into another unit. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "O'Neill armed, but Ranger took care of him." Carla glanced down at the shepherd, whose leg had been wrapped with a makeshift bandage Ethan applied using gauze and a strip from his own undershirt. "You okay?" "Cut on the leg." "Nothing too deep, I think," Ethan said. "But he needs to be looked at." Carla gave a rare, genuine smile. "You picked yourself a hell of a partner." Ethan didn't answer. He opened the back door of his cruiser, gently lifting Ranger in. The dog didn't resist, though his breathing was fast. As they pulled away from the scene, Ethan reached over and rested a hand on the shepherd's back. "You're not just some old stray anymore," he said quietly. "Your family," Ranger, eyes half-lidded but alert, gave a slow, grateful thump of his tail. At home, Ethan tended the wound more carefully, applying antiseptic and a fresh wrap. Ranger winced but stayed still, trusting him fully. Afterward, Ethan sat on the floor beside him, staring at the soft glow of the fireplace. Outside, snow continued to fall, and in that warmth, with his partner beside him, Ethan realized this dog had once belonged to another brave soul. But now, Ranger's story wasn't about loss anymore. It was about loyalty reborn. The following morning, Bearcliff was bathed in the gold of early sunbeams that glistened across the blanket of fresh snow. The chaos of the previous night's arrest still echoed quietly through the police station. Papers shuffled, radios crackled, and the scent of fresh coffee lingered. But for Officer Ethan Miller, the day was far from ordinary. He stood near the main desk of the precinct, uniform pressed and boots clean. Beside him, Ranger sat upright, leg bandaged, but posture proud like a soldier awaiting orders. His coat, though slightly faded with age, shimmered under the fluorescent lights, his black and tan fur groomed neatly by Ethan that morning. A red ribbon had been gently tied around his neck, a touch added by Deputy Carla Monroe, who now approached them holding a clipboard and wearing a rare, soft smile. "We've compiled the evidence," Carla said, nodding to Thesmol pile of confiscated gear now logged and tagged. "That warehouse was being used to move stolen equipment across county lines. You and Ranger just shut down a 6-month investigation in one night." She was in her mid-4s, square-faced with lines that told of 1,000 tense nights on duty. She wasn't known for sentimentality, but even she reached down to scratch Ranger behind the ears. "Guess the old guy still has some fire left." "He's not old," Ethan replied with a grin. "He's experienced." Behind them, the precinct's front doors swung open. Lily entered the room, her eyes wide in awe. She wore a yellow beanie and oversized coat that made her look even smaller than her 10 years. Her brown hair peeked out from beneath the wool, cheeks pink from the cold. In her gloved hands, she carried a folded piece of paper. A drawing, Ethan guessed. Officer Jean Torres, a young woman with warm eyes and copper skin, gently guided Lily forward. "This one insisted on coming as soon as school let out," she said. "Said she had something important to witness." Ethan crouched beside Ranger. "Well, partner, looks like your #1 fan is here." Ranger turned and his tail thumped gently on the linoleum as Lily stepped closer. She looked at the shepherd's wrapped leg and frowned. "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore," Ethan assured her. "He's tough." Ranger, as if confirming it, gave a soft, affirming bark. Then Lily unzipped her coat and pulled out the drawing. It was a colored sketch of Ranger sitting proudly in front of the police station with Ethan beside him. A gold star gleamed on RER's neck, in the drawing labeled Honorary K9. "I made this," Lily said shilly, "because now everyone knows he's a real hero." The ceremony was informal. Bearcliff's budget didn't allow for polished medals or big announcements, but in the heart of the small precinct, amidst the officers who'd seen too much and slept too little, there was reverence. Chief Henry Wallace, a tall, stern man in high surly 60s with silver hair and a voice like gravel, stood behind a podium in the briefing room. His presence always carried weight, and even Ranger sat straighter as he spoke. "Last night," the chief began, "Officer Ethan Millerand, his K9 partner, disrupted an active criminal operation that's eluded us for months. But this is no ordinary K9, and Ranger served his country once before, and fate or something greater brought him back to service." A ripple of nods spread through the room. "For his bravery, initiative, and service to our town, Ranger is hereby recognized as an honorary K9 officer of Bearcliff Police Department." He stepped forward and gently clipped a silver badge, a custom one prepared overnight by a local metalsmith, onto RER's vest. The badge bore a single word under the town's emblem, "Redeemed." The room broke into soft applause. Ethan blinked against the sting in his eyes. Lily edged forward and leaned in close to Ranger, whispering so only he could hear, "Now you have a family again." Ranger licked her mitten in reply. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat with Ranger on the front steps of the station. The sky was streaked in orange and lavender, and clouds hung lazily over the distant peaks. He scratched behind Rare's ear. "You did good, old boy," he murmured. "You came back from whatever hell you were in and found your way home." Ranger pressed his head gently into Ethan's side. Behind them, inside the building, a small paper drawing hung proudly on the bulletin board. Ranger, Ethan, and the station. A child's depiction of a truth even adults sometimes forget. Family isn't always where you start. Sometimes it's where you're brave enough to return. The first signs of spring had begun to stir in Bearcliff, melting the snowbanks and coaxing soft green shoots from beneath the thawing earth. It was a golden afternoon, the kind that lingered in memory like a photograph. Gentle breeze, children's laughter in the air, and the scent of pine, and distant barbecue wafting through the park. In the heart of it all stood Ethan Miller, dressed not in his uniform, but a simple navy flannel shirt, jeans, and boots, still muddy from the trails. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes, those steady storm-gay eyes, watched Ranger with a quiet reverence. Ranger lay stretched at Ethan's feet beneath the shade of an old oak tree, its budding leaves casting flickering shadows over the silver gray of his fur. His body, though still scarred and limping slightly from old injuries, seemed stronger now, fuller. On his neck gleamed a new tag, oval-shaped, made of polished silver, hanging from a leather collar that looked both sturdy and handcrafted. It read, "Ranger Loyal Partner." The tag had been a gift from the department, but the sentiment was Ethan's, not a pet, not a stray, not just a former K9, a partner. "Looks good on him," said Deputy Carla Monroe, who'd stopped by briefly with her teenage son to say hello. She gave Ranger a respectful nod before heading toward the picnic area, her tone softer than usual. "Fits him better than any badge." Ethan smiled, kneeling to pat Rare's side. He earned it. The small ceremony had been humble by design. Just a few officers, some local townsfolk who had followed the story through community newsletters, and of course, Lily. The girl had insisted on being part of the adoption signing, even bringing her own glittery pen for Ethan to use on the forms. Now she raced across the park lawn, a tennis ball clutched in her hand. Her beanie was gone, replaced by a cascade of untamed brown hair bouncing in the sun. She wore a denim overalls and a shirt covered in tiny cartoon dogs. Her face was flushed with joy. "Ranger, ready?" she called, winding her arm back theatrically. "Go long." Rose's ears perked. With a grunt of effort, he pushed himself to his feet, trotting with a slight limp toward the open grass. Lily launched the ball. It wobbled mid-air, but sailed far enough to earn a cheer from nearby children. Ranger lunged forward. He didn't run as fast as a young dog might. His back leg dragged slightly in the dirt and he veered a little off course. But when Here ached the ball and grabbed it in his jaws, the park erupted in claps and giggles. Lily clapped the loudest, Here's shining. He still got it. Ethan chuckled as Ranger returned, tail wagging, ball in mouth. When Ranger dropped the ball at Lily's feet and gently nudged her hand with his nose, she crouched down and whispered something into his ear. Something Ethan couldn't hear, but somehow felt deep in his chest. He looked away for a moment, scanning the park. Families laughing, kids sharing juice boxes. A couple walking their newborn in a stroller. Normally, warmth. It had been a long time since Ethan had allowed himself to be part of something that felt this safe. Before Ranger, his evenings had been quiet but hollow. The silence of a house without laughter, without footsteps other than his own. His fridge was always half-stocked, his TV always on, but never truly watched. He'd never noticed how often he sat in the same chair, or how many nights he dozed off without dreams. But now there was a presence in the house, a heartbeat beside his own. He remembered one night last week when Ranger had barked softly in his sleep, whimpering in dreams only old soldiers have. Ethan had sat beside him, hand on his fur, until the trembling stopped. He knew that look. He'd seen it in the mirror. Pain buried deep. Wounds without scars. Ranger hadn't just found a home. He'd given Ethan one too. Thiessen dipped lower, casting amber light across the fields. Ethan leaned back on the bench, arms spread across the wood. Lily sat beside him, kicking her feet. "Do you think dogs remember their old homes?" she asked. After a while, Ethan looked at Ranger, now lying between them with his head on his paws. "I think they remember the bad and the good," he said slowly. "But the best part? They know when they found something better." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "I think he knew." From the first night, Ethan didn't reply. He didn't need to. Later, as the park began to empty and families packed up picnic baskets and folded blankets, Ethan stood with Ranger at his side, and Lily holding his free hand. The three of them, an ex-soldier turned cop, a stray German shepherd with a heart bigger than his scars, and a little girl with too much loneliness and too much kindness, began walking home together. Not a perfect family, but one built on something stronger than blood, loyalty, healing, and a choice to never walk away from each other again. Sometimes the angels we pray for don't come with wings. Sometimes they walk on four tired legs with scarred bodies and gentle eyes that have seen too much, yet still choose to love. Ranger was more than a dog. He was a quiet miracle sent not only to be saved, but to save. To mend the broken parts in Ethan. To bring warmth into Lily's lonely world. And to remind us all that healing often comes wrapped in fur and silence, in loyalty that asks for nothing, but gives everything. In a world that moves too fast and forgets too easily, this old German shepherd stood as a symbol of faith, resilience, and the kind of love that never gives up. Maybe God doesn't always answer with thunder or light. Maybe, just maybe, he sends us a dog. If you believe that miracles still walk among us, sometimes on four paws, share this story. Comment Amen if you've ever been touched by a loyal dog. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us where you're watching from so we can see how far Rare's story travels. May God bless you and protect all the silent heroes in your life.